They said humans were inefficient, not weak, not stupid, just inefficient, too slow to adapt to perfect systems, too emotional to optimize outcomes, too attached to individuals instead of results. Other species measured output per cycle, per calorie, per worker unit. Humans measured something else, something that didn't convert cleanly into numbers, and so most civilizations decided it didn't count. The colony on Etris 9 had been built without them. That had been the plan anyway. Etris 9 was an agricultural world by design: wide plains, deep soil, predictable weather cycles. It had been settled by a consortium of 3 species who understood large-scale food production better than anyone else in known space. Automated harvesters cut fields with geometric precision. Labor quotas were calculated down to the minute. Every worker assigned to the surface was registered, monitored, and replaceable. Humans were brought in later quietly when things began to fail. Not catastrophically, nothing dramatic enough to justify alarm, just enough small problems that no one could isolate a single cause. Fences degraded faster than models predicted. Soil compacted in irregular patterns. Livestock behavior drifted from expected norms. Yield reports stayed within acceptable margins, but maintenance requests increased year after year. The consortium adjusted algorithms. They always did. It didn't help. So they contracted humans, not as planners, not as supervisors, as supplemental labor. Jonah Hale arrived with a single crate, a handwritten checklist, and a reputation he had not asked for. He was older than most of the surface workers, his joints stiff from decades of gravity that varied from planet to planet. He had worked on 12 agricultural colonies across 4 sectors. He had no certifications that impressed the consortium and no published efficiency models. What he had was a long record of farms that didn't fall apart. They assigned him to a marginal district at the edge of the plain, where wind erosion caused constant trouble and livestock losses were highest. He was given 1 habitat unit, outdated tools, and a mixed crew of contract workers that rotated too frequently to form habits. Jonah didn't complain. On his first day, he walked the entire boundary on foot, not because it was required. The perimeter drones already tracked it. But Jonah wanted to feel the ground. He wanted to see where the soil shifted under pressure, where the grass thinned, where the fence posts leaned just enough to tell a story. The local supervisor, a tall, narrow-bodied Sarathi named Loon, watched him from the transport with mild confusion. "You are aware," Loon said through the translator, "that this task has already been completed." Jonah nodded. "Yeah, I saw the report." "Then why repeat it?" Jonah stopped and pressed his boot against the base of a post. It wobbled slightly, just enough to matter. "Because the report doesn't know this post's been kicked loose 3 times by the same animal," he said. "And it doesn't know it's going to happen again tonight." Loon tilted their head. "The livestock do not exhibit repetitive behavior outside programmed feeding responses." Jonah smiled faintly. "They do when they're bored." The first week passed without incident. Jonah repaired fences differently than the automated systems suggested. He reinforced corners that weren't flagged as weak points. He moved water stations a few meters at a time until the animals stopped clustering in ways that compacted the soil. He spoke to the workers, really spoke, not just issued instructions, and learned who favored which tasks, who struggled, who hid injuries to avoid reassignment. One of them was Rhea. She was not human. Rhea was a Kalari, tall, long-limbed, with slate-blue skin and bioluminescent veins that glowed faintly under stress. Her species was prized for endurance and spatial memory, which made her ideal for long surface shifts. She had been assigned to Jonah's district because she had fallen below expected output metrics after an injury. The report called it a minor locomotor inefficiency. Jonah saw the brace. It was composite polymer, mass-issued, adjustable in theory but poorly fitted in practice. It restricted her stride and forced her weight distribution off-center. She compensated unconsciously, tightening muscles that shouldn't have been doing that much work. He noticed it on the second day. "You're limping more on the return path," he said casually as they walked back from the eastern field. Rhea stiffened. "It does not affect my productivity." "I didn't say it did." She glanced at him, her eyes dark and wary. Supervisors usually do. Jonah stopped near a storage shed and set his tool pack down. "Sit," he said. "I am not in trouble," he added. "Just curious." She hesitated, then lowered herself carefully onto a crate. Jonah crouched and examined the brace without touching it. He noted the pressure points, the uneven wear, the way the joint didn't align cleanly with her anatomy. "Who fitted this?" he asked. "The medical unit." He hummed, "Figures. You are not authorized to modify medical equipment," she said quickly. "I'm authorized to stop people from wrecking themselves on my land." Rhea stared at him. "This is not your land." Jonah met her gaze. "It is where I work, that's close enough." He didn't adjust the brace that day. He waited. He watched how she moved, how she favored one side when tired, how her glow flared brighter when pain spiked. He asked her about Kelari Gate without prying. He listened. 3 nights later, he brought tools. "I can make this better," he said simply. "Why?" she asked. He paused, then shrugged. "Because you're going to be here a while if things go the way I want, and I don't like losing good workers to bad equipment." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded once. The new brace wasn't prettier. It wasn't lighter, but it fit. Rhea stood, tested her weight, and let out a sound she didn't quite recognize as relief until it was already gone. Word spread, not loudly, just enough. Humans, it turned out, did strange things. They fixed problems before they became emergencies. They remembered names. They adjusted systems instead of forcing bodies to adapt. Productivity didn't spike dramatically, but breakdown slowed. Turnover decreased. Maintenance requests dropped. The consortium noticed. They sent auditors. They didn't understand Jonah's reports. They didn't like that his explanations included phrases like "felt wrong," and the animals seemed calmer and people stop making mistakes when they're not exhausted. But the numbers backed him up. And Rhea, who had been flagged as a marginal asset, requested reassignment to his district permanently. When asked why, she answered with a phrase the translator struggled to render accurately. "He treats me like I will still be here tomorrow." That was when the consortium realized their error. Humans weren't inefficient. They were stabilizers, and in systems stretched too tightly, that made all the difference. The auditors stayed longer than expected. At first they limited themselves to observation, standing at the edge of fields with their tablets and narrow eyes, murmuring to one another in clipped, efficient bursts of speech. They recorded Jonah's routines, timed his inspections, noted how often he spoke to individual workers instead of issuing group directives. They flagged deviations from standard operating procedure and filed them for later review. Jonah noticed them, of course. He noticed everything that moved differently in his space. But he didn't change his behavior. He didn't speed up to look more productive. He didn't slow down to make a point. He worked the way he always had, with the steady rhythm of someone who understood that land did not respond to urgency so much as consistency. Rhea noticed them too. Her glow spiked more often those days, a faint pulse along the veins of her arms and neck that betrayed tension she didn't voice. She moved carefully, efficiently, the new brace holding her stride in balance, but there was a tightness to her shoulders that hadn't been there before. They are evaluating you, she said one evening as they secured a gate against the rising wind. Jonah grunted. They always are. They are evaluating me as well, she added. That made him pause. He leaned his weight against the post, testing its stability. For what? Deviation, she said. I requested reassignment. I have improved metrics. They want to know why. And you told them. I told them the truth. Jonah turned to look at her fully then. Which version? Ria's mouth curved in a way that was almost a smile, though Kalari expressions were subtler than human ones. The one they will not understand. He nodded. Good. The first formal challenge came a week later. Loon arrived at the district with 2 consortium representatives in tow, their transport settling into the dirt with a precision that felt out of place among the uneven ground Jonah preferred to leave unflattened. They approached while Jonah was repairing a section of irrigation line by hand, his sleeves rolled up, forearms streaked with soil. Jonah, hail, Loon said. We require your time. Jonah wiped his hands on a cloth and stood. You've got it. They did not sit. The taller representative, a sleek-bodied Avarin with mirrored ocular plates, projected a data field between them. Numbers scrolled. Charts layered themselves into neat, irrefutable patterns. Your district exhibits anomalous stability, the Avarin said. Maintenance incidents have decreased by 19%. Worker reassignment requests are down by 34%. Livestock loss has dropped below predictive thresholds. Jonah waited. This is inconsistent with your assigned resource profile, the representative continued. You have fewer automated systems than comparable districts. True. Your labor allocation model does not align with consortium efficiency standards. Also true. The Avarin's plates tilted, catching the light. Explain. Jonah considered his answer, not because he didn't know it, but because he knew the shape of it mattered. I treat the land like it's going to be here after I'm gone, he said. And I treat the people like they're not interchangeable parts. Silence followed, not hostile, just blank. That is not an explanation, Loon said carefully. Jonah shrugged. It's the only one I've got. The second representative, smaller and jointed like folded wire, spoke then. Your methods are not scalable. Jonah smiled faintly. Neither are broken systems. Ria stood a few paces back, hands folded, posture precise. She felt the attention shift toward her like a pressure change. You, the Avarin said, turning. Kalari worker, step forward. She did. You were previously classified as underperforming, the representative said. Your output has since increased. State the cause. Ria glanced once at Jonah. He gave her a small nod, not permission but support. I was injured, she said. The brace I was issued restricted my movement. And now? It fits. That does not account for the full variance, the representative said. Ria inhaled slowly. I am no longer expending energy compensating for pain or fear of reassignment. Loon's frills fluttered. Fear is not a measurable factor. It is, Ria said calmly. You simply do not measure it. The auditors left without issuing a directive. 2 days later, Jonah received a notice of procedural review. It wasn't a threat. Not yet. Just a reminder that his methods were under scrutiny, that his contract could be revised, that deviations, however successful, required justification. Ria found him that evening on the porch of his habitat unit, staring out at the fields as the wind bent the tall grasses into slow waves. They are going to remove you, she said quietly. Jonah didn't look at her. Maybe. You are not afraid. Sure I am, he said, just not in a way that helps them. She stepped closer, the boards creaking softly under her weight. If they do, I will request transfer with you. He finally turned. That's not your burden. She met his gaze, eyes steady, glow low and calm. It is my choice. Something in his expression shifted then, not surprise, recognition. "You don't owe me loyalty," he said. "I am not offering loyalty," she replied. "I am offering continuity." The words settled between them, heavy and deliberate. They stood there for a long moment, the wind tugging at their clothes, the distant shapes of automated harvesters moving like patient insects at the edge of the plain. Jonah spoke first. "You know they won't like that." "I know," Rhea said. "They do not like things they cannot replace." That night, Jonah wrote his response to the procedural review. He didn't argue efficiency. He didn't try to translate his methods into their language. He documented outcomes, yes, but he also documented context. He wrote about soil fatigue and animal stress and injury patterns that never made it into official reports. He wrote about turnover as a cost not just of training, but of trust lost. He wrote about Rhea's brace, about how a small adjustment prevented a cascade of losses that no algorithm had predicted. He ended with a single line. "Systems that do not account for people will always fail when people are required to maintain them." The reply came 3 days later. They did not remove him. Instead, they sent another human. Her name was Eliza Morno. She arrived with 2 crates, a battered notebook, and a grin that suggested she already knew what kind of place this was. "Jonah Hale," she said, hopping down from the transport. "They tell me you're difficult." Jonah eyed her. "They tell you that like it's a warning, like it's a recommendation," she said cheerfully. "I fix water systems, or I break them and rebuild them better, depends on the day." Rhea watched the exchange with quiet curiosity. Eliza noticed her immediately. "Nice brace," she said. "Custom?" "Yes," Rhea replied cautiously. Eliza nodded approvingly. "Good means someone's paying attention." The consortium framed it as an experiment. They called Jonah's district a human-adapted management trial. They sent observers. They collected data. They tried to extract principles without absorbing the philosophy behind them. It only half worked. Because what made the district stable wasn't just Jonah or Rhea or Eliza. It was what happened when people believed they would still be there tomorrow. Workers stopped hiding injuries. They asked for help sooner. They fixed small problems before they grew teeth. They learned each other's rhythms, filled gaps without being told, stayed. The land responded. By the end of the season, Jonah's district produced less than the most optimized zones, but it lost almost nothing. No sudden collapses, no emergency evacuations, no silent attrition of workers who simply didn't return from rotation. The consortium called it acceptable. Jonah called it success. One evening, as the sky darkened and the plain cooled, Rhea joined him at the edge of the field. She stood without favoring her leg now, the brace an extension rather than a constraint. "You were right," she said. "About what?" "This place will still be here." Jonah nodded. "So will you." She considered that, then asked, "And you?" He smiled, small and real. "As long as they let me." Rhea looked out over the land, the wind tracing invisible paths through the grass. "Then I will remain as well." Not a promise, not a vow, a statement of intent. And for the first time since the humans had arrived on Atris 9, the consortium's models began to shift. Not because they had learned how to measure humanity, but because they had been forced to make room for it. The consortium's decision to label Jonah's district a trial bought him time, but time in systems like theirs was never neutral. It accumulated pressure. It created expectations. And expectations, Jonah knew, were often more dangerous than outright opposition. Eliza settled in quickly. Too quickly, some would have said. She learned the land with the intensity of someone who had been burned by neglect before, and refused to let it happen again. She rebuilt water junctions that had been patched so many times no one remembered their original design. She argued with drones until their logic trees rerouted. She laughed when they tried to override her and rewired the access ports so they stopped trying. Rhea watched her with a mix of admiration and caution. "You are not afraid of them," Rhea observed one evening as Eliza dismantled a valve assembly under the porch light. Eliza snorted. "I'm afraid of water pressure spikes and bad seals. Bureaucracy just leaks slower." Jonah listened from the steps, sharpening a blade more out of habit than necessity. He had learned that humans like Eliza were both a gift and a liability. They accelerated change, but they also drew attention. And attention, on Atris 9, was currency. The first real sign of escalation came when the consortium reassigned a neighboring district supervisor without explanation. The new supervisor was efficient, silent, and utterly uninterested in conversation. Within days, fences between districts were standardized. Shared water access was rerouted. Informal cooperation, borrowing tools, sharing spare parts was quietly discouraged. Jonah felt the shift like a change in weather pressure. "They're isolating us," he said to Rhea as they walked the boundary line one morning. "Yes," she replied. "They isolate variables they do not understand." "They don't isolate storms," Jonah muttered. "They get swallowed by them." Rhea did not answer. She was watching the far field where workers moved in unfamiliar patterns. Faster, sharper, less talk, more mistakes. 2 days later, one of them went down, not dramatically. No alarms. Just a misstep on compacted soil and a knee that bent the wrong way. The worker, a thin-bodied cress with brittle joints, tried to stand, then collapsed again with a sound that was half breath, half disbelief. Jonah was there before the med drone finished booting. "Don't move," he said, kneeling. His hands were steady, voice low. "I've got you." The cress's eyes flicked wildly. "I'll be reassigned." "No," Jonah said firmly. "You'll be treated." The med drone hovered, scanning, calculating probabilities. "Injury exceeds acceptable performance threshold," it intoned. "Recommend transfer." Jonah looked up at it. "Recommend again." The drone paused, processing the unauthorized tone. Eliza arrived seconds later, already pulling tools from her belt. Rhea followed, glow flaring bright with stress. "This is exactly what they want," Eliza said under her breath. "One incident, one justification." Jonah met her eyes. "Then we don't give it to them." He stabilized the joint manually, slow and careful. The cress hissed but did not scream. Rhea knelt opposite Jonah, her hands steady as she supported the injured limb, her own brace grounded firmly in the dirt. "Breathe," she said softly, the cadence of her voice instinctively calming. "You are not being discarded." The words mattered. By the time the med drone completed its scan, the injury had been stabilized beyond emergency parameters. Transfer was no longer mandatory. Treatment could occur on site. The drone logged the outcome without commentary. That night, Jonah filed another report. This one was shorter, blunter. "If you remove people at the first sign of injury, you will never learn how to prevent injuries in the first place." The reply came faster than he expected. A summons. Not to a procedural review this time, but to a direct conference with consortium leadership. Jonah read the notice twice, then folded it neatly and placed it on the table. "They're done pretending," Eliza said. Rhea's glow dimmed, settling into a low, steady pulse. "They are going to ask you to stop." Jonah nodded. "Or leave. And if you refuse, then they'll do it anyway," he said, "just slower." Rhea studied his face, searching for something: fear, doubt, regret. She found none of those. What she found was resolve, quiet and immovable. "I will come," she said. Jonah shook his head. "They didn't summon you. They summoned the conditions you created," she replied. "I am one of those conditions." He considered arguing, then he didn't. The conference was held in orbit, in a chamber designed to make gravity optional and emotion irrelevant. Jonah disliked it immediately. He planted his boots on the floor and refused to let the stabilizers lift him. The representatives appeared as projections, perfect, controlled, distant. "You have exceeded the scope of your assignment," one said without preamble. Jonah crossed his arms. "I fixed your problems. You altered systemic behavior. Yes, you created dependency." "No," Jonah said calmly, "I created resilience." Rhea stepped forward. Her presence registered as an anomaly in the system, an unscheduled participant. "I am Kalari," she said. "I was classified as a replaceable unit. I am no longer." A murmur rippled through the projections. "You are still a worker," one representative said. "Yes," Rhea agreed. "And I am also a person whose continued function depends on stability, not fear." Jonah added, "You don't have a labor shortage, you have a retention failure." Silence. Finally, Loon spoke. "Your methods cannot be enforced across the colony." Jonah nodded. "Then don't enforce them. Allow them." "Allow inefficiency. Allow choice," Jonah said. "You want scalable systems. Fine, but leave space for people to choose how they work within them. You'll lose some output. You'll gain continuity." The projections flickered, calculations ran. In the end, the decision was not framed as agreement. It was framed as tolerance. Jonah's district would remain as is. Expansion would be limited. Data would continue to be collected. A compromise, one that systems favored when forced. As they returned to the surface, Rhea stood beside Jonah in the transport, watching Atris 9 grow larger beneath them. "They did not understand," she said. "No," Jonah agreed, "but they listened. That may be enough." When they landed, the workers were waiting, not in formation, not in fear, just there, curious, hopeful. Jonah stepped out first. Rhea followed. The land stretched wide and steady before them. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something that would happen to them. It felt like something they might build. The return to the surface did not feel triumphant. Jonah had known better than to expect that. Systems like the consortiums did not concede. They adjusted tolerances. They made room the way glaciers made room, slowly, with pressure, never admitting they had changed course. Still, when the transport settled back onto the soil of District 7 and the ramp lowered, something in the air felt different. Not lighter, more alert. The workers did not cheer. They did not rush forward. They watched. Rhea noticed it first. The way people stood closer together than before. The way no one avoided her gaze. The way a few Kalari, a pair of Cress, and even one of the Sarathi inclined their heads in acknowledgement. Small gestures, but deliberate ones. "They are waiting," she murmured. Jonah nodded. "Yeah, for what we do next." He did not make a speech. He walked back to work. That was the choice that mattered. By mid-cycle, the fields needed attention. The wind had shifted again, and the eastern irrigation line showed signs of uneven pressure. Jonah took Eliza and 2 volunteers with him, leaving Rhea to coordinate feed distribution and check on the injured Cress, who now sat with a reinforced joint and a fierce determination to prove nothing had been lost. Rhea did not discourage that determination. She simply redirected it. "You will heal faster if you stop trying to convince everyone you are fine," she told him gently. "I am fine," he insisted. "Yes," she agreed. "And you are also injured. Both can be true." The Crest stared at her, then let out a sound that might have been laughter if his species' vocal cords were shaped differently. "Humans do this too," he said. "They taught me," Rhea replied. It was the first time she had used the word taught in that context, and it startled her how easily it came. As the days passed, the ripple spread. Not outward, not yet, but inward, deepening. Workers began to talk to one another across species lines, in ways the consortium's social models had never anticipated. Humans were used to that, of course, but what surprised Jonah was how quickly the others adapted once the threat of immediate reassignment loosened. A Sarathi began sharing soil aeration techniques learned on a high-gravity moon. A Kelari taught a human crew how to read subtle changes in animal posture that predicted panic. The Cress, brittle-jointed and sharp-minded, redesigned a gate latch so it could be opened one-handed. Productivity did not spike. It smoothed. And smoothing, Jonah had learned, was the precondition for endurance. Rhea felt the change inside herself most strongly at night. She no longer lay awake calculating worst-case scenarios, no longer rehearsed explanations for injuries that might justify her presence another day. Her glow dimmed naturally with rest instead of exhaustion, the bioluminescent patterns along her skin settling into rhythms she had not felt since before her injury. One evening she found Jonah alone at the edge of the western field, sitting on a low fence rail and watching the sky deepen into copper and violet. "You are thinking," she said, not a question. "Always," he replied. "Just different things now." She sat beside him, careful but unafraid, her brace resting solidly against the rail. The contact point between them was small, shoulder to shoulder, fabric brushing fabric, but it carried weight. "They will not stop watching," she said. "No," Jonah agreed. "They can't. We messed with their assumptions." Rhea tilted her head. "Do you regret that?" He shook his head without hesitation. "No, I regret not doing it sooner." She studied his profile, the lines etched by sun and time, and a life spent fixing what others had written off. "Humans do not optimize for the present," she said slowly. Jonah smiled faintly. "We optimize for staying." That word again. Staying. It settled between them like a promise neither of them had spoken aloud. The next challenge did not come from above. It came from within the colony. A neighboring district requested consultation. Not officially, not through the consortium. Quietly, through a human technician who had heard rumors and wanted to know how Jonah had reduced equipment failures without new hardware. Jonah agreed to visit. He brought Rhea with him. The district was tense. Workers moved quickly, eyes down. Injuries were hidden. Mistakes were punished with reassignment threats that hung like static in the air. Jonah walked the fields, asked questions, listened. Rhea watched the Kelari workers there, saw the familiar tightness in their movements, the way their glow spiked and dimmed erratically. She spoke to them in low tones, shared her experience without framing it as instruction. By the time they left, nothing had changed. And yet, 2 cycles later, Jonah received a message. Fence repairs had been altered. A brace had been refitted locally instead of replaced. A worker had stayed instead of transferring. The consortium noticed the pattern. They always did. This time they did not summon Jonah. They summoned data. They compared districts. They mapped retention curves. They overlaid injury reports with turnover rates. They noticed that wherever humans were allowed autonomy, not authority but autonomy, systems bent instead of breaking. It troubled them, not because it failed but because it worked without permission. Rhea felt the pressure again, a tightening beneath her skin, but it did not bloom into fear. It sharpened into something else. "Resolve. You have changed more than land," she told Jonah one night as they shared a quiet meal, the hum of the habitat steady around them. He looked at her over his cup. "So have you." She considered that. "I did not know I was allowed to." Jonah set his cup down. "No one's allowed, we just do it anyway." Silence stretched, not awkward, not empty. Then Rhea reached out, her long fingers brushing his hand. The contact was tentative, deliberate, unmistakably intentional. "I am staying," she said. Jonah's breath caught just slightly. "I know." Not because of the brace, she added, not because of safety alone. I know that too. Because this place, she gestured toward the unseen fields, the workers settling into rest, the quiet hum of systems no longer straining, treats continuity as something worth protecting. Jonah turned his hand, palm up. She placed hers in it, her skin cool against his warm, the contrast grounding. Then we'll protect it, he said. Together. Outside, the wind moved through the tall grasses, bending them but not breaking them. Lights flickered on across District 7 as night settled in, each one a small declaration that someone would be there when morning came. The consortium would continue to watch, to calculate, to struggle with what could not be reduced to output metrics. But on Atris 9, something irreversible had begun. Humans had not conquered the system. They had simply stayed long enough to change it. And that, Jonah knew, was how all lasting things were built. The season turned the way seasons always did on Atris 9, quietly and without asking permission. The winds shifted first. They came earlier from the south, carrying fine dust that softened the edges of the fields and tested every repair Jonah and the others had made. The turbines adjusted automatically, their long blades changing pitch, but it was the land itself that decided what held and what didn't. This time, most of it held. Jonah walked the boundaries with Rhea at his side, their steps unhurried. She no longer counted them. Her brace moved as it should, an extension rather than a reminder, and when the ground dipped unexpectedly, she adjusted without panic, without pain flaring into fear. Jonah noticed, of course. He noticed everything, but he did not comment. He had learned when observation was enough. Behind them, District 7 moved with a confidence that would have been unthinkable a season ago. Workers corrected one another without blame. Injuries were reported early. Repairs were logged honestly, not disguised to meet quotas. The system still existed, drones, metrics, schedules, but they no longer dictated the shape of every decision. They served it. The consortium's oversight remained distant and persistent, but it had changed in tone. Fewer warnings, more questions. A subtle shift from command to curiosity. They never acknowledged it outright. They never had to. The proof was in the fields. On the last day of harvest, the yield came in slightly under projection. No alarms sounded. No reprimands were issued. Instead, a note accompanied the data packet sent to orbital administration. Losses minimal, infrastructure stable, workforce retained. Jonah read it once, then archived it without ceremony. That evening, as the sun lowered and the plain stretched out in gold and shadow, the workers gathered near the central water station. Not for a meeting, not for instruction, just to sit, to rest, to exist together without urgency pressing down on them. Someone brought food. Someone else brought a portable heater against the cooling air. Eliza leaned against a crate, laughing as she told a story that involved a pressure valve, a miscalibrated drone, and language no translator would ever render politely. Rhea sat beside Jonah on the low stone wall he favored, her shoulder resting lightly against his. Her glow was soft and steady, a rhythm now rather than a signal. "This is the end," she said quietly. He glanced at her. "Does it feel like one?" She considered, then shook her head. "It feels like a pause." Jonah smiled. "That's the good kind." The next transport arrived at dawn, not to remove him, not to reassign anyone. It brought supplies, updated tools, and a thin data slate bearing a simple notice. District 7 classification revised. Status: long-term habitation viable. Jonah handed the slate to Rhea. She read it, then looked up at him. "They finally named it." "Yeah," he said. "They always name things after they stop trying to undo them." She folded the slate carefully and placed it on the table inside the habitat, among other ordinary things, tools, notes, small repairs waiting their turn. It fit there. That mattered. Later, when the day's work had begun and the rhythms of the district resumed, Rhea paused at the edge of the field. She watched the workers spread out, each one moving with purpose but without haste. She watched Jonah speak with a new arrival, his posture open, his voice calm. She felt the land beneath her feet, firm and familiar. For the first time since leaving her homeworld, she did not feel like a temporary solution. She felt like part of something that intended to last. That night when the lights dimmed and the wind softened, Jonah and Rhea stood together outside the habitat. Above them, the stars were sharp and distant, indifferent to consortium models and labor projections alike. "You stayed," she said. "So did you." "Yes," she replied, her fingers brushing his hand. "And now I know why." Jonah turned toward her, his expression gentle, unguarded. "Tell me." She met his eyes, steady and sure. "Because this place does not measure worth by how easily someone can be replaced." He nodded once. "Then we'll keep it that way." They stood there as the night settled fully over Etris 9, the fields quiet, the systems humming in balance. The future no longer something imposed from above, but something shaped, slowly and deliberately, by those who chose to remain. Humans were inefficient, the consortium would always say. But inefficiency, Jonah thought, was just another word for refusing to discard what mattered. And in the end, that refusal had been enough.